Hey guys, I'm Matt Lighty, and I figured this was a good time since tomorrow is the 3.25 Settlers of Calgary league announcement and then patch that we should go over the pre-live stream teasers. This has been basically a week and a half leading up to it of them showing teasers for a bunch of how they call it quality of life. Some of these things aren't really quality of life. Some of these are just changes, whether they're good or bad. We're going to analyze them individually. Everything here is subject to change tomorrow, and then subject to change again during patch notes, and then subject to change between the patch notes and the release. And even then, the entire first month of League, everything's subject to change. So, you know, this is more like loose strokes and then kind of ideas that they're trying to implement, and the fine details we probably won't know about. And I'm just going to be like blatantly honest with all these changes. So the first one is in Settlers of Calgary, there is quality of life changes for reservation skills. We're going to watch all these videos as we go through these, so you'll be able to digest with me, and then we can go over them afterwards.
Hi, I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director on Path of Exile. This is the first in a series of videos covering upcoming changes in our 3.25 expansion, the Settlers of Calgary. In 3.25, reservation effects, such as heralds and auras, persist through death, allowing you to get right back into combat as fast as possible. You can find out more about...
Cool, so that's it. So all that is as described in the tagline, which is auras, heralds, reservation effects persist through death. I can't see how this could be negative. I think this seems like an objective, just positive change. I have been like periodically tweeting out as they've been releasing these things. Those are like snap reactions. This is more of a measured one. But I don't know how this could be negative. It's very possible this could come along with a nerf to auras in some way, but that's nothing, there's nothing to glean from that snippet more than auras persist through death, which is a massive quality of life. Fantastic. On to the next one. You could start harvest encounters in just a single action. That's the next one. Okay.
Hi, I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director.
Gonna hear that a whole bunch this video.
We've got a tiny quality of life improvement today. In the Settlers of Calgary update, you can start harvest encounters with just a single action. And yes, we made a whole video about it, just because our marketing team said so.
Okay, so that's it. So normally you would have to click the harvest at this point and then confirm you do it. The only downside I could see here, right, is if for some reason you misclicked, there's no barrier for redemption. It's just going to go off. Aside from that, 99.9% of the time you're not going to misclick, and this is going to be an intentional click. Therefore, this is positive. You know, so far I would say 2 for 2 on. There's no shot that those could be negative. The next one is you'll no longer need to click waypoints to activate them. Hi, I'm Mark Roberts.
I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director on Path of Exile. This time around, we're bringing a few improvements from Path of Exile 2 back to the OG. In 3.25, you'll no...
Okay, so all it is just that when you walk within proximity of a waypoint, it activates, and then instead of clicking it, this is nice in case you ran past a waypoint, and it wouldn't activate. One thing to mention, and I don't know if this is tested, right? But this is a good example of this scenario, I guess, is this area splits in 2 different directions. It looks like the proximity for this is about that distance, and it procs there. If this guy ran right, I don't know if that waypoint would proc, or it's possible that this right here has like a line, like a trigger point, and once you cross it, the nearby waypoint activates. So it depends on how it is. In no way could this be worse than before. This could only really be better, assuming it works. It's just really a question of what is that like trigger point for proximity activation. But again, for as far as I'm concerned, 3 out of 3, no way that could be fucked up. Next up, we have an interesting one.
Hi, I'm Mark
Roberts,
Game Director on Path of Exile. In the Settlers update, we've reworked item quality. The rarity of the item is no longer relevant when applying chisels, blacksmith's whetstones, and armorer's scraps to non-unique items. Instead, the amount of quality they provide is now based on the item level. Those currencies now apply 20% quality to very low-level equipment, with that amount reducing as the item level increases. This makes them much more appealing to use early game. You can find...
Okay, so two things to really highlight here. One, they mentioned about maps. Yes, they still work for maps, and there's no real detriment to that experience. It's only beneficial for white maps and yellow maps. I believe it's like 20% and 10% quality, and then red maps are the same for normal red maps, right? As in white, not the rarity. For gear, the real only thing I could think of is this, since this is multiplicative versus additive now, the benefit for weapons is higher. And also they did showcase a Nightweave robe, a new best in slot ES base. Whether that's a precursor for other ES bases, high base value, high required level. Could be some new bases, but again, this seems like a strictly only positive thing. The secondary information to glean from this is we've had an incredibly strong meta using the Aura's Determination and Grace that have very high flat values. So you don't require lots of scaling of flat off gear. It's flat and percent value gets carried by aura effect and levels. I think they might tone down Grace Determination pretty heavily because they're trying to put more oomph on the actual gear you're wearing, which makes total sense. You want to have armor, you should be wearing armor gear, not just running an armor aura. That change makes sense as long as the numbers shake out to be the same. No problemo there. But yeah, that seems pretty good. This is the tide. I kind of jumped the gun, but this is the exact same thing. We're talking about how the quality is multiplicative versus additive.
I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director on Path of Exile. We've got more news about item quality today. Quality bonuses on armor and weapons are now multiplicative. In other words, weapons with full quality will give 20% more physical damage, and armor with full quality will have 20% more local defenses.
Yeah, so like we said, probably because there's the Determination and Grace nerf, they want to put a lot of that power back into gear. Makes sense. Your gear should be where you're getting your armor from, not an aura. Weapons just got better. However, in Path of Exile, historically, we don't get things for free unless it's like a long workaround. So if you feel like over the past couple of years, Melee has been worse, this could be some borrowed power we're getting back into Melee, or it might be coming from somewhere else. There's been a kind of meme thread about totem nerfs, maybe Warcry nerfs. Could be where we're getting the potential borrowed power from the weapons, or weapons just are better for fizz builds. That's also possible. Either way, on paper, this looks good. Just could be a minor precursor for something bad. Next is an interesting one. Hi, I'm Mark Roberts.
I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director on Path of Exile. Today, we've got more improvements coming in hot from Path of Exile 2. We're adding static life bars to bosses. Not all bosses will have them initially, but we're starting with the pinnacle bosses and act bosses in 3.25.
Yep, so just as it says, static life bars versus life bars when like they're on screen or you're in combat. This is like a no-brainer change. This is one of those things where it's like, yes, it's great. Also, it's existed in gear, you know, from games 20 years ago. So it's like, you know, I'm not going to go full pat on the back. This is an objectively good change. It should have been done a very long time ago. I like seeing more changes like this that involve clarity, especially when playing. Very good, but overdue. Cool. Next one is increase to pickup radius.
Hi.
Mark Roberts.
I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director on Path of Exile. In the Settlers update, the Exile's arms have gotten a little longer. We have increased the range you can pick up items when using a keyboard and mouse, to be more on par with controller users. Here's a comparison.
Okay, let me just back up a little bit. So there's the comparison to the pickup range. It's bigger, but not that big, and is like the smallest band-aid on the problem with loot in PoE. And I think until we get, at the very least, vacuum loot. Like, so, you know, it's kind of like, this is one gem on the ground. This is beneficial in that scenario. If you did like a real mapping scenario where there's 20 pieces of currency on the ground, or, you know, 30 things on your screen because you just killed a yoked rare, right? It's like, this doesn't really help you that much because you're already running up to the pack to loot. Once you're at the pack, it's irrelevant. This benefit is most pronounced when you're looting a single item or spread out loot. But if it's a pile of loot, which is where most loot comes from, this game is in the past couple of years has been pinata based effectively. This doesn't really benefit you because you're already at the pile picking it up. Do you know what I'm saying? So if I have to pick up 20 individual stacks of jeweler orbs, this isn't helping because I'm already there. Now, it's great for I would say like 30% of the gameplay, or there's definitely the first week or two, but after that its impact is going to feel a lot less, and then maybe plateau and then go back up a little bit at the end when your filter is turbo strict. But any sort of content where you're looting a lot, this is basically irrelevant. Like if you were doing a blight map, right, you don't pickup radius is irrelevant because it's all in the pump anyway and you're right there. You know, this isn't going to make it so technically, like, you'll still have distorted nameplates and stuff like that. So this is cool, but we drastically need either some sort of vacuum looting for at least similar loot types, i.e. if you loot a gem, we get all the gems, or if you loot a scarab, we get all the scarabs or something, because loot in PoE is like, the game is already RSI wrist killer enough, even with a turbo strict filter like I use, and it's like, this is great for leveling and like light content, but any sort of heavy content, this is kind of irrelevant. So cool, still a step in the right direction, love that. This next one is the first one where it starts getting really in the weeds context wise, because I don't trust how strong it is, but let's watch it.
Hi, I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director on Path of Exile. In 3.25 we're adding a 6th map device slot. This one was a bit of a nightmare for our UI designers. You don't want to see the prototypes.
Okay, so they're adding a 6th map slot, which is objectively a bunch more power because scarabs are really good, right? I just think there's no way that we're going to get a 6th map slot without scarabs being nerfed or the Atlas being nerfed to the point in which a 6th map slot is going to feel like a 5th map slot. Like, if we just get 20% more scarabs, and that's the case, that'd be fantastic. I cannot imagine that's happening. But this is where you get them from, though.
The 5th and 6th map device slots are unlocked by completing either your first 10-way encounter with the Maven, or completing your first tier 17 map.
Now, this is really funny. So you get it from doing a 10-way, which is like, you just hit red maps, you do a 10-way for Maven, easy peasy, it's day 3, whatever. And then a 17, which is like the hardest content in the game. So huge gap between your 5th and 6th slot, right? Now, it says that you get it by doing either or. You're never going to do a 17 before doing a 10-way. That's like cuckoo crazy. So unless 17s are nerfed into the most flaccid form of content possible, which is possible, but you're going to get this from doing a 10-way, basically, and then we're already going to have a 5th map slot. So it's 4 slot, plus extra scarabs. I feel like this is going to come with a patch that we have scarab nerfs, substantial scarab nerfs, either substantial Atlas nerfs, or this power is going to be redistributed somewhere. But if I'm wrong, and we just get 20% more scarabs to be used when juicing, that is fantastic. Either way, the real change to focus on, assuming it's just effectively the same as last league, is you don't have to do a 17 to get your extra slot. You could do a 10-way, which you would be doing the first week of league anyway. So that's good regardless of if it's the same ultimately as last league. No matter what, it's just an alternate way to get that extra map slot, being the 10-way. The next one is really confusing, but there's a lot to unpack here.
Hi,
I'm Mark Roberts,
Game Director on Path of Exile. In 3.25, we are changing the Bandit quest reward in Act 2. If you choose to help Oak, he will grant you plus 40 to maximum life. Helping Alera grants you 15% to all elemental resistances, and helping Creighton gives you 8% increased movement speed. If you choose to kill all 3, Eremir will give you 1 passive skill point. We have also changed the Through Sacred Ground quest in Act 2 to provide an additional passive skill point.
Okay, so TLDRs, the 2 points were redistributed, 1 to making a bandit decision and 2 to just the other quest. So everyone gets 1 point. So the question becomes, would you rather have a passive, or would you rather have 40% life, or 15 all res, or 8% movement speed? There's a couple things to focus on here. The thing number 1 is Alera lost the crit multi and the flat mana regen. That's pretty substantial. So C's just strictly worse. I would argue that Oak is strictly better at 40% life. If you're going to pay a passive point for 50% life on a life mastery, builds that would probably pick 40% life, at least for the beginning. Alera at 15 res would make sense, I guess, in a race or hardcore, but res is a massively redundant and dead stat after LAW cap, unless you're specific stacking, right? If you have 140 res and you're LAW capped or whatever, any amount of res past that is worthless. Okay. Movement speed is a weird one. right? Because movement speed is like, if you have under 100, you're too slow. And if you have over, we'll say 250, you're too fast. Anything between that's the sweet spot. So, because it's like too hard to control your character, or it feels kind of sluggish otherwise. So this could be okay. I'm definitely would never get a passive point and respec out of it because that process is annoying. So in the long-term scale, is either of these three things worth a passive point to any build I would play? The closest is the 40 life, but even then, nothing comes close. And I'll tell you why. So if you're spending 2 to 3 points, right, to get one jewel socket, what you're competing with is a unique jewel setup, a cluster setup, or an adorned jewel. That is the competition. So if you take an averaged adorned jewel, not a top-end adorned jewel, an averaged adorned jewel, right? It's going to be, we'll say 8% defense or life, a substat, and then an implicit, okay? And then you're doubling it, and then we're taking half of that value. So we have to double it, right? So it's like, this is competing right here with like 80% life, curse reduction, and like area damage or dot multi. That's the competition. Because an average adorned is going to be over 100, so it's doubling the value, right? So it's like, you could take 40% life, and it might be 45 might be better because of how scaling happens, or I could take what would be a mediocre adorned jewel, and I could get 8% life, a sub damage stat, and an implicit. So in no way am I ever taking the bandits. You know, when I'm thinking, if I'm thinking my build's going to last past a week. If I'm thinking my build's going to last past a day, I'm never taking the all-res. And I'm just never taking the movement speed, because movement speed, this is like a very specific task, like a lab runner or like a deep delver, I don't know, something like that, or sanctum. This is something I never would be interested in. Because I wouldn't pick up 8 points, or 8 movement speed for 1 point ever. But the res is a stopgap. The life could be useful, but a passive is way too strong. Like, and then obviously next league, Adorn could be removed from the game, and all of what I'm saying is irrelevant. This is why I hate speculative content, because it's nullified on patch notes, and then even more so in release. But either way, it's definitely more of a decision, but it's still, I think, no decision, realistically, if you play a lot, or if your build has progressed a lot, because passives are super insane. Next is Simulacrum waves being reduced. This one has a ton of questions it poses.
I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director on Path of Exile. In the Settlers update, we have removed the first 15 waves from the Simulacrum. Usually, characters reaching this content were a high enough level that the first waves were tedious and unrewarding. Simulacrum should now be a lot faster to run. On top of this, we have added more opportunities to get the specific unique items, like voices, by defeating the bosses as you complete waves.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there. So the main thing is Sim went from 30 waves to 15 waves. Now, in general, that's great, because the first 15 waves sucks, okay? It's just, you're just sitting there, there's not that much loot, and there's not that many opportunities to spawn bosses, so it's just like, you're just sitting there waiting for 20 minutes, whatever. So in general, this is good. The questions I have are this. Will the loot from the first 15 waves be redistributed to the new 15 waves? Right? Is it going to be 30 waves of loot now crunched down to 15? If so, fantastic. If not, not a big deal, because again, the first 15 waves were pretty paltry in what they offer. The phrase he uses is the uniques acquired from Simulacrum will be found more commonly. By what metric is the question? Like, so if you were to spawn on average 5 bosses, right, in 15 waves of Simulacrum, can you now spawn 6? Or is the drop rate of a voices go from 1% to 1.1%? Both of those are more commonly, but until we know by what amount, it could be a negligible difference. It could be a massive, it could have made the voices drop rate 10% off of a boss. You know, who knows? This requires massive testing. There's so much to be digested here that until we run large amounts of Simulacrums, we're not really going to know if this is beneficial. At the worst case scenario, you're just running a sim faster and you're getting to what you want faster. So it just more sims per hour, but it might not be more value per Simulacrum if time is not a metric that you care about. If you had free time, this might be worse as of right now, but if you didn't care about the time and you just want to churn and get more uniques, then I think this is only better. Most likely this will be better, but the phrasing is so ambiguous that it could be left to interpret as an incredibly minor increase to uniques, or it could be a substantial one. Again, requires testing. I don't really care too much about the loot in Simulacrum either way. Like, the things you're there for are the uniques. So if that is actually a noticeable increase in split personalities and voices, that's fantastic. Megalomaniacs are kind of whatever. In Solo Self-One and Trade League, you wouldn't bother running a sim, you just buy the one you want. So, you know, but overall, pretty cool. Next and last one. It's not the last one. They added one today that's not even on this fucking mega thread. We'll have to find that.
I'm Mark Roberts.
I'm Mark Roberts.
Game director on Path of Exile. Notice anything different about this map hover? In the Settlers of Calgary update, you can hover or select a map at any time on your atlas to see which divination cards can drop there. Select a map at
Okay, so there's a couple good points of information here. So the idea is if you hover over a grotto, it shows you what cards are in grotto. That's cool, right? That's cool on paper. Two things. It also shows you what specific map tier, because if it's a top tier grotto, right, it might require a certain level to drop them. You have to use a void stone to bump it up. So it's good that it has that information, right? This is player protection, respecting players' time. Always a good thing. If we can't type in a keyword in this search box and it triggers and affects the divination cards, that's a bummer. And what I mean by that is if I type the word primordial, if it doesn't highlight the maps that have the primordial tag that drop the primordial card, that's a bummer, right? Because this whole function is to promote us to not tab out and go to the wiki, right? If I have to tab out and go to the wiki to see every map that drops a primordial, I don't need this function in game. This is redundant, right? So if we're going to be introducing functions in game to prevent third-party usage and prevent wiki usage, which I'm all for, I would like to play my game and not have to tab out, right? I don't want to go to a wiki page. I want to do everything in game. I want to love my game. I want to play my game. But if it doesn't, if I can't look up what maps have what, and I just have to go one at a time and say, oh, what map has primordial? What, you know, that's a bummer. Second thing to note here is this. Let me show up though. This is going to be interesting. Okay, so that's the grotto. Grotto map. All right. Items found from this monster. Wow, the void anomaly. Now, you'll notice something interesting here. So these are the drop restricted cards in grotto. That's a lot more than 4 cards. And there's only 4 cards showing here, right? So what is going on? Well, these are the 4 cards that are specific to grotto, and some of these cards are generic cards, okay? Some of these cards are generic as far as they drop from the mob type, right? So you'll notice something interesting here. This is grotto. The grotto has the void anomaly boss, and the void anomaly boss specifically drops specific cards, because this card doesn't drop from the map, it drops from the boss. Now that's like a bucketed form of information that is kind of bullshit, right? Because this boss only spawns in this map, so it basically drops from the map, but legally it only drops from the boss, so it's not being shown here. In Path of Exile, in general, when you're picking your time to invest into something, if you have partial information to this degree, it's like basically detrimental. Because you wouldn't know that the Mind's Eye dropped in Grotto looking at this function. So this is good, but it needs to be fleshed out more for it to make sense, because realistically, you'll always have a void anomaly spawning in Grotto. That's the boss that spawns in Grotto. Now, obviously they could shift this, but there's 1,000 examples of this persisting in other places. Cage, I think, is another one, where it's like the boss is a specific card that drops off just the boss and not the map, but the boss only spawns in the map, so it can only happen here. It's just like one of these things. So this is cool partial information, but requires the search function and more extensive, you know, displays if it showed like boss is void anomaly, or, you know, you see how the tagline requires? Like it could show the Mind's Eye card, right? And then just say in black text underneath, you know, drops from boss void anomaly or something. And that would make sense. But until you have that, I feel like this is just kind of partial information, and that amount of like half-assing isn't really helpful. I would have rather this system not be introduced until it's fully introduced, if that's what we're going to get. Maybe it's more fleshed out on launch, but on first look, yeah, you need to be able to know that sort of stuff, or like generic cards that drop from things. So that's that. There's one more also that's not on here. Once I hit refresh, and it is on here. Nope. Okay. This one.
I'm Mark Roberts.
I'm Mark Roberts.
Game Director on Path of Exile. In Settlers of Kalgur, you might stumble across strange new encounters in Tier 16 and Tier 17 in-game maps. One such encounter is the Wildwood, from the Affliction League. Here you can explore the mysterious forest and release its powerful wisps to enhance your map. The characters from Affliction have moved on, and you won't be able to acquire the Wildwood ascendancies in these encounters. However, we might have other plans for that content. You can find...
Okay, so a lot to unpack here. So he says endgame encounters, one of which is Affliction. So that means there's going to be more endgame encounters introduced in this expansion, in this patch, aside from Affliction. Now, Affliction is one of the strongest leagues of all time, if not the strongest potentially, for uniques and for currency drops. So if that's not toned down, it's the best thing in the game. Bar none, right? It's probably going to be toned down, and the other question then is, will it have Scarab support? Will it have Atlas Tree support? This is going to be one of those things where if it's half as good as it was in Affliction, and then also has Tree and Scarab support, it'll be the best mechanic in the game, right? If we can get even close to what Affliction League was, because that blows every other league out of the water, for the most part, for currency gain, for a bunch of stuff. Now, sure, there was a specific meta regarding Abyss Spires, but even that, regardless of that, there's things you could do that is just bonkers with Affliction. The other thing is, there was an extremely good jewel in Affliction that wasn't mentioned here. They specifically mentioned the subclasses, like the Warlock, not being in the game. They didn't say anything about King of the Mist. And King of the Mist drops a set of uniques that were added to the base game, except for one of them, that which was taken jewel. Maybe that's reintroduced. Maybe the King's reintroduced. Who knows? Now, the other league mechanics that aren't in the game currently that we have been asking for, effectively, my only thought is something like Sentinel, because what other endgame encounters could there be aside from, there's no Necropolis. Crucible would be horrendous in any sort of minor injection. So I'm thinking probably Sentinel as another in-game encounter. That's my best guess. Possibly Recombinators, but if not, just big juicy Sentinels. That would make sense also in conjunction with Affliction, because it's a big juicy league. Pretty cool there. But there's a lot to unpack there. You know, will these things have representation in Scarabs and the tree again? Who knows? That's going to dictate everything. If a mechanic doesn't have a tree and doesn't have Scarabs, it's kind of dead in the water. You know, do something like Harbinger, and then do Harbinger with no Atlas passive and no Scarabs, and it's like a little infant, a toddler of a mechanic. But you can get it, you can crank it up to 11, and it's fantastic. So if that's the case, that'd be great, but we have to wait to see what representation it has in the end game compared to other mechanics, whether it has tree or Scarabs. But it could be cool. So a lot to unpack there. So we guaranteed Affliction. My guess is also Sentinel along with it. Maybe Scourge, possibly, but probably not. That's a whole other fucking ball game. But yeah, pretty cool nonetheless. But that's it. Those are all the things from the mega thread. The reveal is tomorrow. Feel free to check out stuff. And the live stream, I'll be live tomorrow for that. And then I'll be doing updates on patches, assuming it happens, etc. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. But yeah, I don't really like speculating too much. That's baseless. So this is about as far as I'll go. Everything here is based off of like historical precedent in the past or kind of facts identified. I'm not going to assume that there's just like an overarching plan for other things until presented with patch notes or other information. But a lot of positive, I would say almost objectively more positive than potential negatives here, you know. So should be good. If you have any questions, again, ask them in the comments below. I'm Mathew Lighty. Have a good day, and I'll see you guys in the 3.25 live stream. Bye-bye.